You're listening to Centered. Thank you for listening and subscribing. This week, our special guest is New York Times best-selling author and former Obama speechwriter David Litt, whose latest book, It's Only Drowning, explores the search for common ground in an era of polarization. Plus, Elon looks to launch a third party, and the Supreme Court greenlights more federal worker purges. I'm Louis Miranda alongside Jeremy Murphy and Carl Meacham. David, congratulations. It was a fun read. I actually switched over to the audiobook version at some point, and your delivery there was great too. But there's the book. It's Only Drowning. I enjoyed it. I love the sense of humor, but also the substance in it. And I think it's such a great book for the moment we're in, where so many people are looking around and trying to make sense of the polarization. There's people who've ended relationships over the election outcome. There's a lot of people going through a forced professional transition here in Washington, but also around the country. Talk to us about how those dynamics, exacerbated by the pandemic, moved you to seek common ground with someone as different from you as your brother-in-law.
Well, thank you all for having me on this morning, or at least we're taping it in this morning. The secret is out. I did not expect this to be a book about what it ended up being about. This book for me was my semi-retirement from politics. I got hooked on surfing at the advanced age of 35 years old. Was like, all right, I'm going to be a surfer dude now. I'm going to write a book about surfing because I was always going to be better at writing than surfing. So I had to figure out some way to make it all work. And then, to my surprise, the person who I ended up spending the most time in the water with was my wife's younger brother, Matt. And Matt and I have nothing in common. I mean, he's covered in tattoos. I'm wearing a T-shirt to tape a podcast, and that's my version of edgy. Um, Matt once threw out his back training to become an ultimate fighter. I once threw out my back lifting a bag of cat litter. So we're quite different. And we're also different in the ways that are dividing our country demographically, right? Matt has an electrician's license and is an electrician. He drives a pickup truck. I have a bachelor's and, from an Ivy League fancy school, and have spent my entire working life in front of a screen. And so, without meaning to, I ended up almost living this story between or across these fault lines that are both tearing friendships apart and tearing families apart, but also tearing the country apart. And what started as a book about, can David learn to surf? And that's still in there, as you said, Luis. There's plenty of funny stories about falling off a surfboard or almost getting eaten by a shark. But what the book ultimately ended up being about was this question of, in this moment when there really are major differences between us, and I don't want to paper over that, can we find ways to have relationships and friendships that cross those fault lines?
Yeah, no, it was enjoyable to read. My brother-in-law is very different from me. My sister married someone who was younger. He was a Navy veteran. He was an airplane mechanic in the Navy. So he was deployed for back when the Abraham Lincoln was on its 18-month deployment, doing those bombing runs. He was the one keeping those planes running to do those bombing runs. But he and I couldn't be more different. And so I felt a little bit of a commonality in reading about that, although he's not, I don't think he's on the MAGA side. He's sort of like right down the middle. So I thought that was really interesting, was sort of that overarching search for connection with people who are close to us, but also that sometimes it's worth trying to rescue those and understand those, and the idea of the mask and the vaccinations that drove that kind of division. I think that's still there and it's present, but I feel like it's starting to get to a point where some of those divisions feel much harder to overcome, particularly as you look at the ICE raids and the family separation. And, Donald Trump came out on July 4th and said that he hates half the country. He hates everyone who voted against him and said that they hate America. So what are your thoughts about what that difference in tone and whether we can still find common ground, or is it just getting harder?
Well, I think it is getting harder. I think there is um, one of the things I think is very important about this moment is that the reason the country feels divided is that we're extremely divided, right? This is not, it turns out that actually when you peel back all the layers, we agree about these big things. We don't in many cases, right? For me, a bunch of guys in masks jumping out of an unmarked car and kidnapping a guy outside a Home Depot, that is as terrifying and as un-American as it gets. And there are other people, and I've gotten to talk with some of them in the course of, in the 2 weeks since the book has been out, who say, "Oh no, you're overreacting," and we're not going to find common ground on whether that's acceptable. My point with this is where it benefits Trump is when people say, because we can't find that common ground, we can't spend any time together. That doesn't work. And I'm not, by the way, suggesting that you have to spend time with someone you don't like, or that if Stephen Miller was like, "Hey, let's go surfing," I would be like, "Yeah, totally, let's do it." Right? Some people are beyond the pale, but I think most people aren't. And when people cut off contact with, their friends and family who voted for Trump, or in the case of me and my brother-in-law, he is not registered to vote still, but he's kind of in that Joe Rogan demographic, and he didn't get vaccinated, right? And I would have felt a lot of pressure to stop speaking to him or to not be friendly to him. And I don't think it's working as a way of getting people to change their behavior. I do think it's making people's lives less interesting and worse. Right? One of the most important things that I feel like I learned from this journey and that I hope people take away from this book is you can learn from people even if you don't always understand them and even if you sometimes deeply disagree with them. It doesn't mean you have to say, "What I've learned is you're right about everything and I'm wrong about everything." What it means is that you're saying, "Hey, you have things about your life, ways of seeing the world that I can learn something from." And when we stop learning from each other and we retreat into our own bubbles, it might feel safer in the short term, but I think it diminishes our lives. I really do.
I have friends who voted for Trump, and we kind of decided that the talking orange in the White House is not worth ruining our friendship, and that's kind of
Hmm.
the line. Like, no, 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 you're not going to ruin this friendship. It's too strong.
Yep.
And
And I think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Louise.
no, I was gonna say Jeremy was for some context, he was kind of an Alex P. Keaton Republican when we first met. He's evolved. He's a Democrat now. Not that it's not evolved, not to be.
Is it,
Uh,
well, I don't know. I'm still a Democrat. I'd argue it's evolved, but I
yeah,
recognize reasonable minds might sometimes differ. Go ahead.
yeah.
Um, Jeremy, what I was going to say about this just real quick is I think what you're talking about with those friendships is important. And also, one of the things I found when Matt and I started hanging out together is it became a lot easier to talk about politics without it feeling like we're trying to debate each other. Now, that's not true for everybody. And I've taught, one of my volunteers from when I was a field organizer in 2008 for Obama, her husband was sort of still is a staunch Republican, and they said they just don't talk about it because they didn't want Trump to ruin their marriage, and I think that's totally legitimate. But I also think that sometimes when you have that foundation of mutual respect, it gives you a chance to say, "Tell me about this. I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm not trying to debate you. I'm not trying to win an argument. I'm just trying to know more about you because I'm kind of curious." And I will, and also because I'm curious how people like who think the way that you do think about stuff. So that I will. I mean, I absolutely. There was stuff happening during the 2024 campaign where I was like, "Oh, I can see this coming," just because I'm spending time with somebody in that group of people that is swinging toward Trump and ended up putting him back in the White House.
Just jumping in here briefly, David, you really did a great job in this effort. And I have a couple of thoughts and a question. I think in Washington, we generally focus so much on politics that we forget that people aren't just political entities. I think you mentioned surfing and other parts of your life that help you connect with people who might be very different from you. And I think that's a great reminder. When we talk about politics, we sometimes assume that everyone shares our same background assumptions or life experiences. But that's really rare. Your book does a great job of unpacking that, breaking down those assumptions in a way that feels really necessary, especially right now. As you mentioned, we're living in a polarized moment, and it's critical to find ways to understand each other better. That brings me to my question. Um, in the exploration that led to your book, did you also find areas of common ground, things that we share that could help
So it's interesting,
bridge
Carl.
these
I
divides
think,
and
when
reduce
Matt and I
polarization?
met in 2012, we had nothing in common. And today I would say we still have basically nothing in common, right? Like that's I thought in almost an Obama '08 way. I was like, well, we're, going to, build bridges and we're going to realize we have so much more in common than we thought. And not really, right? Like little things, like it turns out we both like one Joe Rogan episode. He likes more than one, but I really like the one with Kelly Slater, who's like the goat of surfing. And we both are really big Taylor Swift fans. So that was surprising and kind of cool. But like there's not a big broad thing that I've learned. What I think I have learned is that the fact that we don't have that much in common doesn't matter as much as I thought. Now, one thing, by the way, that we obviously do share is an interest in surfing. So that, that's sort of what I think of as neutral ground. That I think is very important. And the other thing I will say is that once you're in that neutral ground, then you start to find things that surprise you. So just to give you two examples, and I'll try to make them quick. One is induction stovetops, right? So that's been a big sort of culture war issue because people like me say get rid of gas stovetops because of climate, and a lot of people on the right say, well, it's choice and freedom, and gas is American or something. And then Matt and I ended up in Spain at an Airbnb, and they had an induction stovetop, and now he really is into induction, not because of climate, but because it's a better way to make an evenly toasted breakfast burrito, right? Like that's so little things like that. I will also say, I was thinking about this the other day. Here, I'm in New Jersey right now. We have a bag ban in Monmouth County. You have to buy reusable bags. You can't get plastic or paper bags. And I remember talking with Matt about this, and he kind of convinced me that like that's a silly policy. I'd like to see what we have in DC, which is a 5-cent bag. You have to pay for them, but they're not expensive. That I think would work better. But talking with him about it, I was like, okay, my reflexive position was, nope, this is good for the environment. The intentions are good. And the more I talked to him, the more I was like, yeah, I think this sounds dumb when I'm trying to defend it to like a person who isn't thinking politics all the time. And I think I learned from that. So I guess, Carl, my answer to your question is like yes and no. But when you have that neutral ground, you learn things that surprise you.
I have a question. So I know some surfers, and they always. By the way, I don't surf. I don't put myself at risk willingly. Um, but they talk about the clarity of it, and it clears your mind, and going through a wave. They said it's just the most peaceful thing. And I'm wondering, did that experience, the physical experience, inform and maybe open your mind and to clarity?
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult to start surfing and not talk and like not talk in a way that anyone who doesn't surf is like, oh my God, that guy, right? As maybe you've learned from some of your friends. But I do think there's something to that. And first of all, I will say, if you're a beginner surfer at 35, it takes a very long time to get to any clarity. Like it was a year easily before I felt that sense that you're talking about. But it wasn't so much that like my mind, I saw like the ultimate truth while riding a wave. What I think it was more is that when you're on a wave, it's a type of energy that we don't experience in our lives. Our wave energy. This is a little bit wonky, so I'm going to keep it brief. But basically, the water is pulling up the wave. It's not actually going down. And what that does is it hits the bottom of the board. The water comes back out, and so you're essentially this reverse gravity that you never feel any other time. And it's very addictive to feel that. And it wasn't that in that moment I saw truth. It was realizing that that feeling that I'm chasing, and the feeling Matt's chasing, and the feeling the person next to me who I've never met and don't know anything about is chasing, it's all the same, right? We find the same thing transcendent and addictive. And I do think that's a useful reminder these days because it can feel in a way that it didn't when, I had my first job in politics in '08, right? It felt more obvious to say we share goals, even if we don't always agree on how to get there. And sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. It feels like we don't share goals anymore. So to have this kind of shared objective that had nothing to do with not just politics, but anything in life was a nice reminder of that sense of there is something fundamentally human here. And so, I may not respect all your opinions, but, we may or may not become friends, but we have something in common.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I got to tell you, surfing is really hard. I'm impressed that you were able not just to pick it up, but seem to have done well with it. I tried it for the first time when I was 44 a few years ago. and I didn't try it more than a couple times.
How,
It kicked my
did you
ass.
get up? Yeah, did you get up on a board?
Very briefly, and
Okay.
but I spend more time under the waves. And look, I'm someone who grew up in the water in South Florida, but the water in South Florida is always warm, so you
Yeah.
always have that. And so I was used to getting rolled by waves, and I
Yeah.
could spend 3 minutes underwater, not even worried about whatever rolling, and just come out the other
Yeah.
side.
But
But
it's sharky in Florida, much more
yeah,
so than up here.
depends on the time of year.
Yeah, well, I don't, at least the surf breaks, like New Smyrna and stuff. I guess that's further north than where you
Yeah,
grew up, but it's like famously sharky in a way. We have sharks in Jersey. We got a couple of sharks.
yeah.
Apparently, there's a lot this season, but it's not. Like Florida's one of the only places where I'd be like, oh, I'm not so sure. There's like,
And thank God for
looking
the
for
tracker. I
fins.
was I was hearing that in your book, and I was like, oh, I guess that's good that you can check if they're there, but I don't know if that makes it better or worse.
Well, for Jeremy and Carl, that basically there's a research organization that it puts like Bluetooth tags on shark fins, and then you can follow the shark around. And what happens in theory is you know where the sharks are, but really like it just tells you once every week, once every couple days. So all you know is that the shark is around. So it's not really comforting. It's just kind of a reminder of like it's there. You'll probably be fine, but don't think too much about it.
And how delayed? How delayed is the information, David? I mean, is it real time?
Oh no, this is super delayed. So like it's maybe you could say okay, there was a shark here a day ago,
Or is it
but it's not
delayed
like a
that you might
Find My
end up?
Friends but with a shark.
Find My Friends would be nice.
Yeah, which is also I will
Oh
say
boy.
probably for the best because almost anyone who surfed has surfed around sharks. If there are any sharks in the area, sharks don't usually bother you, right? Like this is part of what I learned and what I end up writing about in the book that I was the kind of person who was like trying to calculate the odds of very low percentage events, right? Okay, sharks attack this many people in a year and there's this many people in the beach. And then, but factor that in by the constant of the fact that I'm in a wetsuit, which is harder for a shark to distinguish between a human and a seal, blah, blah, blah. And now I'm like, I don't know, after we get off this recording, I think I'm going to try to head out because around low tide, I'm like, yeah, there's sharks. Okay, it's fine. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I think maybe it's because I watched Jaws early on. It's terrifying for me, but it's a really cool sport. I also think that the idea that you were exploring in the book about that change in your life too, I think is important, right? If your first book was about those hopey changey years at the White House, and that was kind of a coming of age story with the context of the West Wing, but this one also felt like that moment in your life when you're also trying to figure out who you are as you hit kind of that midpoint.
Yeah.
And I think we're all further along on it than you are, but
I was gonna say I'm
uh,
38, so I hope it's not quite the midpoint, but it's closer than I'd like. Yeah.
But I think you could have done this without the sharks. Let's just be honest.
Well, I don't know. I for me the question of a book all the time is it particularly a memoir, right? Is am I changing? Is this a story of how I'm changing? And that's when I started off just being like, oh, I'm surfing because I want a hobby. Then I was like, I'm going to write this book about surfing, and then I was like, I'm going to write this book about this friendship and surfing still in it. But to me, the moment I knew this was a book was when I felt that I was learning stuff that was making me a better person, and also that even if you were not in the water with me, right, you didn't have to be maybe Jeremy, I guess where we could end up is I learned things that I couldn't have learned without the sharks, but so that if you read the book, you can learn them without having any sharks in your life.
yeah, I
So I
thought one of
think,
the more
yeah,
important ones along that same line of sort of coming to terms with middle age and with life and with the people who are in your life. I thought that idea, that theme that kind of emerged towards the end about, maybe you're doing something with someone, but what does it mean to do it together? In this case,
yeah,
you were talking about being surfing with Matt, but maybe he's on a different part. He wants to go for the more aggressive waves. You want to go for the more central ones, and maybe you see each other just 2 or 3 times along that space,
yeah,
or maybe just at the end you catch up. And to me, that's such an important point for whether it's friendship or even a relationship. And in a marriage you go through so many ups and downs, or a long-term relationship where like that idea that like it's okay if you spent your time in that part of the waves and I spent mine over here, as long
yeah.
as we're still kind of coming together at the end.
Yeah, I mean, my rule for this book is I want anyone who reads it to talk in surf metaphors nonstop. So I feel like I'm winning here, Luis. Um, because that's how I ended up. So it's only fair that other people suffer the same fate. Um, I I think I actually want to add something else that I learned and combine the two. So in surfing, when you catch a wave, even if you're pretty much a beginner, right? You feel amazing. You're like, I look so cool. Like, in your mind, you're like, oh, professional surfers, they look like I look because that's how I feel. Then if you see yourself on video, you're like, oh my gosh, that is the most embarrassing spectacle a human has ever presented to the world. And what I learned through this was that you have to be able to say both of those things are true, right? The feeling is true,
Mhm.
and that awesome exuberance and sense of transcendence, it is real. And also, all the stuff that you're doing wrong when you look at the video, that's real too, and you need to improve. And you can't, if you allow yourself to be totally bummed out by the video, that's not fair. And if you allow yourself to pretend that you look like a professional surfer when you clearly don't, you'll never get better. And I think that one of the things, like what you were talking about, I think that idea of holding kind of two truths in your head simultaneously is so important, especially once you're old enough that at least some doors have closed behind you. And so there's always going to be this sense of like, yeah, the things could be different. And I think that is always true. And sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. But also you can focus on the things that you have that you have and that you've earned and that you've learned to get to whatever point you're at. And those are true as well. I think it's about having not balance, but sort of two things simultaneously.
I always start from the basic assumption. And it's like a metaphor that folks who don't think like me still want what's best for the country. They might have different ways of getting there, but I assume that they want the best for the country. That's something we're really losing today. And your book, especially the metaphor of surfing with your friend, who's very different from you, right? Reminds us of that. It shows that we can connect beyond politics and find common ground.
Well, the other
You
thing
know,
I would say, Carl, like Reagan said, trust but verify. And I think many of us, when it comes to each other, have flipped that around, right? We're like distrust and confirm our distrust.
Yeah.
And so one of the sad things we have all learned in the last decade plus is that there's plenty of people who, let's be real, don't want what I think anyone, and we all have different views in different ways, but I think we would all agree on a sort of broad set of things that we want the country to be, and most Americans would agree with that. And there are definitely people who don't agree with that, and some of them are running the country. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. And then at the same time to say, when it comes especially to what I think of as like civilians, right? Just people in our lives, I think it's so much better to start by saying, all right, my first assumption, I'm going to assume the best, right? I'm going to assume that you want essentially what we all want. And then over time, it is possible you will prove me wrong, and that's sad. But I'm going to really only say that as a last resort, not as a first resort. And that's the thing that I've noticed. And the internet makes this so much easier, unfortunately, right? There's a lot
Yeah.
of videos that do well online that are like, someone doesn't live your values, cut them out of your life. And you're like, okay, that's a
Mhm.
good internet video, but it's not a good way to live a life.
Yeah.
It's not like that sort of instinct being like, nope, you're out. Like, that's so boring.
I do
agreed.
think that's terrible. And I know I promised you 30 minutes. So let me just ask you one last question on this idea. Joe Rogan has obviously created this space that's kind of just right of center that is pulling a lot of people, but he's also like not happy with a lot of what the Trump administration is doing. Now Elon Musk is talking about starting his own third party that will help create sort of a different polar center in Congress to force compromise. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think that we're at a moment when people are actually receptive to that?
Well, I certainly don't think that Elon Musk is interested in enforcing compromise. I also don't know if he'll follow through on stuff because, we've been waiting for a robo taxi for, it's what, like 6 months away for a decade. But I do think that if you look at Rogan, what's interesting to me about like, and I've made this point a bunch as I've talked about the book, like my brother-in-law is not a MAGA guy. He's a Joe Rogan guy. And so I think a lot of Democrats are like, oh, Rogan must just be another Tucker Carlson, right? He's just another sort of Fox News style conservative. He's really not. What I think he taps into is a very American feeling, for better or for worse, of don't push me around and I want to be in control of my own life, right? I want to feel self reliant. And that is true when it came to health, right? Where he's like, do your own research and like, get exercise, and that you do that instead of a vaccine. It's true when it comes to money. I think it's why crypto is so attractive to that group. And it's true, or it has been true when it comes to government. I think Trump is trying to tell everybody what to do all the time, right? Like that is kind of his thing now. And so I think Democrats have an opportunity. And I think if Elon Musk um, sort of starts a political party or even just remains a thorn in Trump's side, you're going to see this opportunity grow just because people will no longer identify as MAGA. I think Democrats have an opportunity to say, good government is not about controlling your life. Good government is about putting you in control of your life.
Mhm.
And it's not even, some of that's policy, but some of it's also just speaking to what people's aspirations are, which is often not saying, to put it a little bit differently, right? Like saying, I don't need the government to protect me from sharks, right? It's not really that big a problem. I'm willing to take that risk. What I want is a government that allows me to like go surfing, I mean,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. It's just a different way of approaching it. And I'm just to make one last point. Um, which is broader than all of this, but that the approach we take toward risk, um, Democrats have become a party of people who are risk averse in all kinds of different ways. And I say this as someone who is often risk averse. Um, Younger men and non-college educated men as a demographic group, speaking generally, tend to be much less risk averse. And so sometimes the problem is just that Democrats don't speak that language, right? Like there's this sense of, why are you so scared all the time? As opposed where Democrats say, no, we're trying to be sensible, right? And like, I'm not saying
Yeah.
that anyone is necessarily right or wrong here, but you can see why people are talking past each other.
David,
No,
I could tell
absolutely.
you that I love the fact that you're surfing because it's really cool. I am risk averse, so the only way I'm chasing waves if it's a Nazi U-boat is chasing me. Okay.
I mean, give it time these days.
Yeah. We're almost there,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
see what Grok comes up with.
Right.
and unfortunately, it does seem like where they're like, I used to do a lot of Fox News. I went on Tucker Carlson a lot, so I got to know him through that process. And I'm not sure he believes all of the stuff that he says, but also I went on there a lot and on Laura Ingraham and other Fox shows because I understood that if there's 5 million people watching them,
Yeah.
maybe 2 million are people who are just never going to want to listen to us. But there's a lot of people there who are somewhere along a different kind of spectrum where
Yeah.
they just haven't heard these ideas before. They might find them interesting, and I think we can't lose sight of that. So
Yeah.
I think it's important to continue talking to each other, even when it's on Fox News.
I
And
agree with that.
so I appreciate the book for that reason, for creating
Yeah,
the
I
space
did.
to
I
have
did
these
Fox and Friends
conversations.
a couple weeks ago, which was
Yeah.
Yeah,
I never
and
would have
don't
imagined it.
forget, Joe Rogan had Senator Sanders on. And he's open to these real, honest discussions. I think Rogan is someone who the whole country listens to. And that shows people actually want to hear different opinions and feel in control, not just play it safe, right? I think more Democrats should go on his show. More should be crossing over and meeting people where they are.
Yeah.
I agree, and I would add to that too. If you don't know him yet, I think James Tallarico going on Rogan recently, right? Texas state lawmaker, young guy, not Bernie style populist. He's really the first non-Bernie Democrat that Rogan has had on, and I think that's a really interesting potential turning point. And also, I think James Tallarico is really just an interesting figure in the party right now.
I think
Yeah.
Bernie would show up to the opening of an envelope.
I mean, good. By the way, like that's part of what we have learned. I know we're going past 10:30, but we'll. So, Luis, you
If
call
you're
whenever you
good,
want.
I'm good.
I'll give another couple of minutes because I know I was late. I did a CNN thing once where it was like a documentary series on Trump before the presidency, and so it was people who had followed him around for a really long time. I forget why they wanted to talk to me. It was Obama speech stuff, right? But I said to the producers, "What's one thing you learned about Trump that the rest of us don't know?" And they said he just shows up, right? Like when he was doing a golf course deal in Scotland, and he was just a business guy. he would show up and do the signing himself, even though a typical business person would just, send someone or call in, with like a video chat. And for a lot of people in parts of the country that did not have political rallies before, certainly not big ones, the fact that Trump was willing to come to a place that both parties had said, "Oh, it's not worth my time," that really mattered to a lot of people. And I will also say it's mattered to Democrats who do it well. Andy Kim, who's a senator from New Jersey, I talked to him during the pandemic, and he was like, I think it's really important to be masked and responsible, but to show up. If like people are working in small businesses, I want to go be there and ask them how they're
Yeah.
doing. And I remember thinking, like, okay, but doesn't that seem like it's suggesting it's okay to be outdoors, right? And Andy was 100% right. And it's one of the reasons he was able to win a Trump district when he was in the House multiple times, because he showed up, he listened to people, and I really learned a lot from that conversation where he was 100% right and I was totally wrong.
Yeah. No, and along those lines, I think Zoran Mamdani's win in New York is a good example of showing up and actually having conversations with people instead of just assuming you're either going to win or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Rahm Emanuel has been making the rounds. He was on Jake Tapper yesterday, and he was trying to sort of also paint this picture like, okay, it's fine. He did a good job. He showed up. He listened to people, and his ideas might be off, but the problems that he's raising are important. But he raised the New Jersey governor's race and the Virginia governor's races as examples that just because Mamdani's winning doesn't mean that that's where the party's going. You have much more very centrist candidates in New Jersey and Virginia, and so the conversation is going to be much broader than that. What are your thoughts on that, being in a New Jersey, living some of your time in New Jersey, but also knowing Rahm, your expectation of his potential presidential campaign?
So I've actually never met him, but we've all heard stories. Let's say, and I grew up in New York too, so I still like have some interest in the city, and love for it. Here's what I would say. I think that basically we need a big tent as a party, right? We need a bigger tent than Republicans do because the Senate is entirely rigged against us. So forget the New Jersey governor's race and the Virginia governor's race. We need to win just to win the Senate. We need to win Senate races basically in Iowa and Texas at a minimum. To do that, you're going to be running a different type of candidate than you're going to run in a mayoral primary in New York. And I think most people get that. Where I also think that even if you're running in Texas or Mississippi or Alabama, you can learn a lot from Mamdani is be in people's phones, right? Like he ran a campaign where he was just found ways to get into your phone a lot. That's very different than making the traditional rounds. The other thing that he did that I think was appealing to men in particular is, right, when he did stuff that was outdoors, it was just like he looked healthy. I don't know how else to put it, right? He walked the length of Manhattan. It's basic stuff. It's not like he was, bench pressing 350 or something, but he was just doing things that seemed like vibrant. And I do think that for men and for younger men in particular, that's appealing. It's not a deal breaker to not do it, but it certainly helps. And he was,
Yeah.
and like we were talking about, he was everywhere, right? And I think that, and again, I think that's a sign of respect to be everywhere, right? If people say, okay, I may not agree with this person, but he took the time. And I think that's really, really important. So, on a policy side, and I've said this, there are absolutely concerns that I have with some of his signature policies where I'm like, I hope they work, but I don't know that they're going to actually solve the problem they're trying to solve. But on the other hand, I've been wrong about a lot of stuff. So I would love to be wrong about this too. I think it's like, it's an experiment. That's what democracy is all about. But I think that in particular, when it comes to the type of campaign and the type of candidate, there is a lot Democrats should learn nationwide. That's different than being like, oh, just copy paste, right?
Yeah.
That there's no one, but the big tent, you can never copy paste. Everyone's got to run their own race.
Yeah, and I think that the challenge is just getting people excited, especially on the younger side of voters, that you're going to need in a general election in places and in situations where you are running more centrist candidates. But I think you're absolutely right. We are a big tent party. I remember when we won the majorities in 2006 in the Congress. That was such a big deal to build that coalition that would eventually put a Democrat back in the White House. It took people like John Tester in Montana to
Yeah.
win races, and Jim Webb in Virginia to win races to be able to get us there.
Well, the other thing, and maybe I can kind of end. I know I'm I'm supposed to be plugging my book, but I'm going to end by plugging someone else's Substack post. Steph Feldman, who was Biden's policy director and worked in the Obama White House as well, she wrote a really smart piece on her Substack. And I don't remember the name of the Substack, but Steph Feldman is her name. And it was about this idea of creativity, right? That it's not left and right. It's that Democrats need to get creative about policy, and that can look very different in a lot of different ways. I mean, I'm thinking about Mary Peltola in Alaska, who won a race by being pro-fish, right? That says I'm not like other Democrats, because you don't hear the Democratic establishment talking about fish. It's not socialist or capitalist or whatever. It's just creative. And so I do think that the sort of quote unquote Democratic establishment needs to be careful that they're not saying, oh no, we're the party of like stagnation, or like we're the wing
Yeah.
that is stagnant, right? It's more about how do you do creative stuff everywhere that matches the place and that you're running and the voters who you're speaking to.
That's a really good point. And, we're not going to forget to plug it. It's Only Drowning.
Right,
Great
I'm glad
book.
we got that in there.
Yeah. Thank you
Um,
so much, David. I think it's a phenomenal book. I'm glad that it's already a bestseller. And it certainly contributes a lot to the conversation right now. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it was great to be here, and thank you for having me on, letting me talk about the book and also all this other stuff that you guys are thinking about.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
All right, and now let's turn to the federal judge who temporarily blocked the Trump administration from mass layoffs a few weeks ago. Just this Tuesday, the Supreme Court intervened and ruled, basically struck down the injunction. So in theory, allowing the administration to move forward with widespread layoffs, what they're calling reductions in force, or RIFs. New layoff notices are expected to go out imminently. Essentially, what the Supreme Court did was to punt. They've done this in other cases. We saw it recently with the Supreme Court decision that struck down nationwide injunctions from federal district courts, but still left open the possibility of nationwide blocks, class action lawsuits, or individual lawsuits being filed in different districts. So they didn't rule on the substance on that bill. The birthright citizenship that was at the heart of that case didn't actually get decided. That's still pending Supreme Court action. But the decision, in essence, allowed the administration to move forward on treating births differently depending on where it happens, and not to mention a number of other cases that'll be affected by that per that Supreme Court decision. But punting on the actual decision, and that's what we're seeing here, is essentially a determination by the court that the broader right of the president to issue this executive order is fine. The heart of this issue is whether the administration had the right to undo what Congress did through appropriations and authorizations at several agencies. The administration, in theory, is going to start those layoffs. But what's happened now is that the plaintiffs have asked for decisions on the actual reduction plans at each of the agencies. The judge in this case, the federal district judge, went ahead and issue a timeline that by Monday, the administration has to respond with those plans. Now, keep in mind, Marco Rubio, he was just asked about this, and he went ahead and said that, like, well, this is something we had already notified Congress about. So he expects the reductions at the Department of State to start moving imminently. But the administration had previously said that they couldn't provide those individual agency plans to the courts because they were pre-decisional. And yet, if they were about to issue layoffs, then that seems to contradict the idea that they hadn't actually finalized those plans, because otherwise, how do they issue layoffs if they haven't actually finalized the plans? And so this game that the administration is playing, and that the Supreme Court is giving them the space to play, is certainly creating a lot of concern and stress and unnecessary pains with the federal workforce. Remember that the federal workforce, for lack of a better word, keeps the trains running. You have the State Department personnel. We've talked about this in a couple of episodes ago, that they're the ones who are going to have to follow through on all of the outcomes, all of the potential issues that are going to result from the recent bombing of Iran, including proliferation issues. When you look at some of the other federal agencies that have been, some have already been dismantled. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is gone, and that ensured that consumers were protected from predatory banking practices, excessive fees, things like that. That's already gone. But you have a lot of agencies where federal workers that should be focused on providing legitimate services to taxpayers for their dollars and looking out for them are instead waiting for these cuts to happen, which is a really terrible thing. And this idea at the heart of this case, where the administration is claiming that the plans for the individual agencies weren't ready, were pre-decisional. This story is particularly concerning this week because we're also seeing that a top Department of Justice official who had been dismissed because of filing a whistleblower complaint provided now text messages to the Senate Judiciary Committee that shows and that proves that the top department official, who's currently being considered for the seat on the federal bench, by the way, had said that the Department of Justice needed to consider telling the courts basically F you and to ignore any court order blocking efforts to remove immigrants to El Salvador. It's incredibly concerning that this administration has been playing fast and loose with the judiciary. And even though federal district judges have been diligent in dealing with these cases, the Supreme Court appears to be giving a little bit too much space to this administration to try to play games. We have a Republican Party in Congress that's refusing to conduct any kind of check and balance. And then the Supreme Court gives them the space to sort of run a little bit roughshod as well. So we'll see what happens, but incredibly unnecessary stress being placed on the federal workforce over these potential new round of layoffs. And with that, thank you again for tuning in and for listening. Carl and Jeremy, thank you guys. Our gratitude again to David Litt for having joined us today. I thought that was a great segment. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, if you're not already subscribed, please share. Please tell your friends about the podcast and encourage them to follow us, and we'll keep the conversation going. Our panel featured Louis Miranda, former Obama White House communications advisor and former spokesperson at DHS, Carl Meacham, former Clinton appointee and a former senior Republican staff on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Jeremy Murphy, former CBS executive, author, and publicist.